Have you ever watched a plane spin back toward the ground because of a lie with your kid's name on it? Have you ever stood there seatbelt tight while hundreds of eyes turned you into a problem instead of a person? If it were you, what would you have done? My name is Marcus. I am an engineer by training, a dad by instinct. And on that morning in Detroit, I was a man counting breaths. 4:30 a.m. House quiet city. Cool one lamp on in my daughter's room. Amara was already awake, not because she was excited to fly, but because she was living a life most adults would dread. She's 11 and she runs a company. On her desk, 3 monitors scrolled code and metrics user sessions ticking up like fireflies across 47 countries. Dreamscape, the platform she built in this very room, had crossed $1 billion valuation 6 months earlier, but the money was never the point. The point was kids. Kids who had been left behind by one-size-fits-all classrooms, now leaning forward, engaged, seen. I brought hot chocolate like I always do, because ceremony calms nerves, and she gave me the look she gives before big rooms, hair tucked behind her ear, eyes bright but tight. "They're expecting someone older," she said, and then more quietly, "they're expecting someone who doesn't look like me." I told her what I tell her every time, and I meant every syllable. You're not walking in to prove you belong. You're walking in because they need what you built. Feel that shift, right? One puts you on trial, the other puts you in charge. You know what I mean. We were a machine at the airport, not glamorous, just practiced. Backpack tablet, triple redundancy on the presentation. Thumb drive. In my pocket. Backup in hers copy in the cloud. I booked myself in economy on purpose. She sat in first on purpose, not because we couldn't sit together, but because I want her to be comfortable when it matters. And still remember, the curtain isn't a wall between people. Row 2 seat, a window. Mine 3 rows back aisle, line of sight on that curly head just high enough to clear the leather. That line of sight is a tether. Fathers know. Boarding felt routine, the human murmur, the soft click of luggage wheels, the hush of a cabin settling. Amara slid into 2A with the composed movement of a kid who's flown enough to know where every pocket and button lives. She smiled at the attendant, tucked the tablet buckled in. Then he arrived late and loud in a quiet way, a man in his 50s with an expensive suit, and the kind of entitlement that makes space for itself without asking. He stopped at her row, frowned at the seat placard, like it had betrayed him. "Excuse me, you're in my seat." Amara didn't shrink. She checked her boarding pass, checked the placard again, said with that careful calm, "I've taught her to cultivate, this is 2A, this is my seat." The attendant, Sandra, I remember her nameplate, stepped in, smile precise, scanner ready. She verified both passes, nodded at Amara. "Sir, your seat is 12C in Economy Plus." The man blinked like he'd been insulted by physics. "That's impossible, I always sit 2A on this route." He glanced at Amara, then back to the attendant. "Surely there's some flexibility. Perhaps the young lady wouldn't mind relocating." That word, surely, makes ugly sound reasonable. "Do you think that's fair?" From across the aisle, a voice cut in, pleasant, steady steel underneath. "I can take 12C if that keeps the child in the seat she paid for." The speaker was an older woman with silver hair, swept neat posture that said habit, not effort. She rose, the man hesitated. Calculation flickered across his face and he took her aisle seat. Crisis averted, right. At least the visible one. But bias rarely leaves when you ask nicely. It lingers. It looks for a door. Sometimes it finds one. We hit turbulence, sudden and sharp, the kind that lifts your stomach, then drops your plans. Amara's fingers tightened on the armrests. No drama, just that quiet clamp I know too well. Zoe, our COO, slid up from economy with that move or get moved energy. Only women who hold companies together can wield hand on Amara's shoulder. Breathe with me in 4 hold, 4 out 4. The plane steadied. My kid steadied. Richard, we'd learn his name later, kept his eyes on his laptop like the world beyond the glass couldn't touch him. Then Michael, the younger attendant with the tablet, came to 2A voice, trying to be casual and failing by a hair. Miss Jenkins, the captain, would like to speak with you. Wait. The cockpit, mid-flight. My knees were already halfway out of my seat before my mind caught up. In the cockpit, Captain Sullivan had the tired kindness of a man who knows process keeps aluminum tubes safe in the sky and sometimes hurts people on the ground. We received an anonymous security tip. He said someone claims Miss Jenkins is traveling under false identification. Silence the kind that roars. I've lived long enough to recognize the shape of a vague accusation. It's fog with teeth. We handed over her passport, the meeting confirmation, with SUNTC Ventures Company docs, the entire adult life we carry, to prove our right to move through the world. He examined everything, nodded, and still said the words that make safety rigid once a security protocol is activated. I have to follow it. We're diverting to Oakland. If it were your kid, if the room you'd been preparing for all summer sat across the bay and a stranger's suspicion rearranged your day mid-air, what would you do? The plane rolled toward a remote corner of the airport fences and numbers, no windows, just procedure. Security boarded 2 officers, an FBI agent introduced as Rodriguez, professional voice eyes that understood exactly what this looked like. We stepped into the galley, presented documents again. I kept my voice low. Useful. You can yell at wind, it won't change course. Passengers watched with that mix of curiosity and judgment you can feel on your skin. And in the middle of it, I watched my daughter's face smooth into the mask she uses when business gets ugly. Not to hide fear, but to protect purpose. Stick around, because what happened next will blow your mind. While they verified what we already knew to be true, our counsel. Diane arrived like an answer key. She didn't waste time on outrage. She spread out printouts and pulled up notes, and in 10 minutes she mapped a pattern that made the cabin feel colder. In the past 6 months, 3 other minority-founded tech companies had been hit with anonymous tips right before major funding rounds, each tip triggering investigations that found nothing, but not before they derailed momentum. The same vocabulary kept reappearing in the allegations. The same timing. The same shadow. TechCore Ventures, a firm famous for aggressive acquisitions and a track record of loving innovation most when they can own it. And then the first twist hit. The older woman who had offered her seat in first class, Elizabeth Montgomery. She wasn't just a kind stranger. She had been a TechCore vice president. She resigned the day before our flight. Suddenly, the kindness had a context, and the context had teeth. The agent stepped aside to answer a call. Diane's phone buzzed, and by the time we left the airport, 2 things were true at once. We were cleared to go, and we were part of something bigger than a rude man in 2A. At the hotel, while we tried to rebuild the day around a meeting that no longer existed, the man from 2A asked to see us. Richard Blackwell, mid-50s, the posture of someone used to doors opening. He didn't swagger into the conference room. He walked like gravity had been turned up. He didn't pretend. He said it before we could. I made the call. Anonymous during turbulence. He opened a folder from his own company. Next-Gen Educational Systems, recently acquired by TechCore. Inside were strategy docs, emails, minutes from meetings where they outlined a plan to smear competitors, including Dreamscape, right before funding or expansion milestones. He looked at my daughter and said the quiet part that most men wall in euphemism. When I saw you in that seat, I couldn't accept it. Not because of what you did, but because of what you represent. Two truths hit me at once. Disgust, that it took federal agents on a plane for a grown man to name his prejudice, and a hard, reluctant respect, that he didn't hide from the naming. Do you get that grace doesn't mean absolution? Grace means we refuse to let a wound become our whole story. Amara listened, and then she tilted the room back toward mission. My team is shipping a dyslexia update next month. Your nephew might benefit. Sign him up for early access. Richard blinked. He nodded. He promised to make a formal statement and hand his documents to the FBI. And then he left, carrying the weight he'd brought. The next morning, we walked into CUNTC Ventures with the kind of composure you grow in fires. Elizabeth sat on the board now, newly appointed, no special glances, no covert signals, just a calm face that had watched the worst version of our industry and decided to do something about it. Amara presented. No theatrics, no precocity for its own sake. She laid out a map for global expansion that respected bandwidth and budgets. Localization and language. She demoed accessibility features that let kids with visual impairments feel a learning platform, not just see it. She talked ROI with the precision of someone who has actually read the spreadsheets and lived the classrooms. And then she did the thing that always shifts rooms. She made them imagine a child they love, and what that child could do if learning listened back. I watched posture change around the table. Crossed arms, unclasping pens that had been props start moving. Questions got better. The chair thanked us, said they needed to deliberate, and we were ushered out to stare at the bay and pretend to breathe. 45 minutes later, we were back in the room. Full funding, the chair said, and an additional allocation dedicated to accessibility. Then he added the part that matters when storms roll in. We will stand publicly with Dreamscape if needed. In a world where silence is the default defense, public alignment is courage. Yeah, that happened. By the time we hit the elevator, Diane's phone was buzzing with a statement from the Bureau. A formal investigation into TechCore Ventures for corporate espionage, securities, fraud, conspiracy. Big words. Bigger implications. Evidence would need to hold, lawyers would sharpen knives, and the news cycle would do what it does, inflate, spin, move on. But something had shifted. You could feel instead of read. The story wasn't just a seating dispute anymore. It was a mirror. And mirrors are hard to look into when you don't like what they show. 6 months later, the auditorium at Detroit's Community Innovation Center hummed with a noise I wish I could bottle. Teachers and parents and kids and technologists all in one room for the launch of Dreamscape's Global Access Initiative. 27 countries, localized content, adaptive modules tuned to culture as much as curriculum bandwidth-efficient builds for places where Wi-Fi is a rumor. Amara had grown an inch, and also somehow 3 years, the way kids do when the world tries them early. Zoe ran comms like a general. I stood in the wings and tried not to pace a hole in the floor. Elizabeth sat anonymously in the audience, no spotlight, a whistleblower who'd made herself a target, because sleeping at night mattered more than sitting comfortably at her old firm. Richard was there too, not as a hero, not as a villain, but as a man taking his medicine and choosing to cooperate to fix what he helped break. People are complicated. We can hold more than one truth at a time. On stage, Amara told the story plain. A seat is leather and metal, and a number, she said, but it can become a test, and sometimes the test doesn't measure the person in it. It measures the people around it. We will not spend our lives begging for chairs, she added quietly. We'll build bigger tables. The room stood as one, not because we'd knocked TechCore off a pedestal, but because kids in Nairobi and Tulsa and Manila and Detroit would open a laptop and see a classroom that finally saw them back. A little girl asked, "What do I say when grown-ups tell me I'm too young to code?" Amara smiled. Age is a number, clarity is a qualifier. Show them. The applause felt like weather changing. Now here's the part where I make it uncomfortable because tidy endings teach us nothing. We still live in a world where anonymous tips can weaponize procedure against the people least likely to be believed, where safety protocols designed to protect can be used to humiliate, where the market tries to buy what it cannot build and break what it cannot buy. We still live in a world where my daughter, your daughter, might have to carry extra documentation like armor on a domestic flight. Do you think that's fair? If it were you in row 2A, would you have moved just to keep the peace, or would you have held your ground and taken the turbulence that came with it? Here's what I know. The day our plane turned around, yes, gravity felt like it had picked a side. But turning also did other work. It turned a stranger into a witness. It turned a bystander into a whistleblower. It turned a room of money into a room of courage, even if only for a day. We didn't win everything. We won enough to keep building. And that is the work. Not to be the loudest voice in the cabin, but to be the most relentless on the mission, seatbelt light on or off. So tell me in the comments, what would you have done in 2A? Would you switch to appease a stranger or stay where you belong? Would you confront him yourself or let the attendant handle it? Does the context change your answer now that you know the rest? Should anonymous tips be enough to divert planes? How do we balance safety with dignity? Where's your line? I genuinely want to hear your take, your stories, your pushback, because this isn't just our flight. It's a culture we're all either fixing or feeding. If this hit you in the gut, if you felt your jaw clench at the word protocol, or you smiled when an 11-year-old held her ground, do one thing for me. Tap like so this story gets in front of someone who needs it today, subscribe for more true stories told plain, and share this with the person you'd want in your corner at 30,000 feet. Drop where you're watching from, because I read those and this community keeps me honest. New stories every day. Stick around. Because what happens next might change how you see power and how you use yours.